BMNR is on an absolute rampage. It's up 19% in the past week alone. I've been talking about BMNR and I've been accumulating it pretty heavily. And yesterday I made a post on X and it went kind of viral relative to what my posts generally do. And so I wanted to make a video to talk about that because I think it's an important topic for everybody who is in BMNR and who is interested in getting in right now. In this video, I'm going to talk about that along with what I'm doing with BMNR and what my plans are going forward. Let's jump right in. Okay, so first and foremost, I made this video on YouTube and it was basically titled 3 Reasons Why I'm Buying BMNR. And I also made a corresponding X post, which I'll cover in this video. And in that post, I said BMNR is around 3.5% of my combined portfolios, yet I feel underinvested. Granted, I did buy more BMNR since this happened. I bought more even today. And BMNR right now, along with the appreciation from the calls and the actual shares, it's now closer to about 4.5% of my portfolio. And the reasons are still the same. I made this post like 4 days ago. And so the 3 main reasons why I'm accumulating as much BMNR as possible is number 1, the Ethereum ecosystem tailwinds that we're going to see. There's regulatory and political shifts in a crypto-friendly environment with the Trump administration coming in. Ethereum is the preferred institutional transaction layer. All these institutions are going to use the Ethereum chain for their exposure in blockchain. And actually, a couple of days ago, there was the All-In Summit, and I was watching Robinhood CEO Vlad Tenev talking about tokenizing securities and offering tokenized shares in OpenAI and SpaceX and all of these other coveted private companies. And I think the fact of the matter is that a lot of that is going to drive high demand, and a lot of it is going to happen on a blockchain like Ethereum. And I also continue to say that we need a credible spokesperson for big institutional volume, and I'm going to jump straight into that piece in just a second. The second reason is that the Treasury model like BMNR is proven to have leverage, and that if times are good, you're going to make more money, and if times are bad, you're going to actually lose more money. But I think that times going forward are going to be good. And finally, the technical pattern looks strong, which I think the move we've had since making this post has proven that out. And the funny part was that YouTube viewers commented saying that, oh, this is just the 2025 Cathie Wood, and it's easy to be a genius in a bear market, and Tom Lee is just a pumper, essentially. And I said, look, guys, I think you're missing a point here. I think it's intellectually dishonest to come to those conclusions because they're oversimplifications of what the actual reality is. Because I was buying Bitcoin in 2019 and in 2020, the Bitcoin that I still hold right now. And I said, look, I remember back in 2019, Tom Lee actually went on CNBC and he advocated that everybody should hold 1 to 2% in Bitcoin. And at that time, Bitcoin was only $5,000. And the host in CNBC said that's crazy. Basically, that it's financially, morally, ethically wrong to suggest to people that they should hold money in any of these key speculative assets. And Bitcoin was $5,000. And Tom Lee was like, look, it's about risk. You can afford to lose 1% for an outsized return, which is absolutely the mentality that you should have when you're looking at these positions, asymmetric reward to risk ratios, right?
Right now, if you actually think it's undervalued by that extent?
Well, you know, we think the best approach for most people is just to put 1% or 2%.
Are you saying that? I get that if you're somebody who's got a lot of assets. I still think it's crazy. But for a retail investor, somebody who's saving for retirement and putting that aside, that seems crazy to me.
Well, it's basically the idea that, you can afford to lose 1% if that's 1% of your portfolio.
That's crazy. You might as well throw it away on high fees to an investor, to an average. Like this, you're taking a flyer on that. You don't know where it's going to go or what's going to happen.
Well, in a way, that's right, Becky, that for the majority of people, it's, 1% is like a small risk bet. But, Bitcoin makes all of its gains in 10 days in a year. I think this is an example that, if you exclude the 10 best days, Bitcoin loses 25% a year. So you got to essentially hold it or hodl it, as they say, to really capture the gains.
And the fact of the matter is, I get frustrated every time I watch that clip because of all the negativity that guy had to go through over the years where the market maybe wasn't as hot, or because his plays were too bullish or too speculative. And really, this is who Tom Lee has been through and through. He's been impermeable. And just because things are going his way now doesn't automatically make him a pumper or the Cathie Wood of 2025. Tom Lee has just been consistent in everything that he said through and through, whether people in CNBC or other outlets agree with him, or whether those same people disagree with him. And that, I think, is the fundamental reason why so many retail investors are also jumping into BMNR. Not because he's a pumper, or because it's a sign of a euphoric market, but because he has been true to his principles and his thesis and his morals, his convictions from day one. And I think that if you're true to your convictions from day one, consistently speaking, through bull markets, yes, but especially through bear markets, such as 2022, when he was the highest analyst on the street, consistently, people remember that kind of conviction. People respect and admire that kind of conviction. And as a result, people are wanting exposure to somebody that is associated with that position. And in this case, it happened to be in BMNR because the thesis makes sense and because people believe Tom Lee now more when he speaks, because he's been consistently proven right by the market. And I mentioned in the Bootleg Weekly podcast, I said, look, these are treasury companies. Michael Saylor paved the path for treasury companies to prove to the market what was out there and how the business model could be viable. He did it with Bitcoin. Tom Lee is doing it with BMNR, and others are doing it with other chains. I know that there's a Solana treasury out there. There's more than one treasury company. Because these treasury companies don't really produce anything themselves, it's not like a company like SoFi, for example, where they have different product lines and those product lines accumulate members and those members make more money for the business and they have gross margins and they have profit margins and all of these actual operational metrics. A treasury company is as good as the value of what it holds in its treasury, just fundamentally by definition. And I said, look, if you have 10 treasury companies, how are you going to determine which one you are going to put your money into and which horse you're going to back? Because fundamentally, there's not really much to distinguish one from the other because they don't produce anything. They hold different things. And as a result of that minor fact, I think the spokesperson and the credibility of the person behind the treasury company is in itself a moat and a differentiating factor, not only as a result of the reputation that they've accumulated. So in the case of Tom Lee, because he's been consistently correct in the market, but more importantly, as a result of the networks and the contacts and the influence that that person has to drive forward their horse relative to all of these other picks. And so when I'm looking at BMNR versus other plays that are in that same space, the Ethereum treasury space, or just to keep it apples to apples, of course I'm going to pick BMNR because Tom Lee is a differentiator. And people who say, well, actually, he's a pump and dumper or whatever, like they haven't been following him for long enough because he's been around for years and he's been very consistent in his thesis. And so that's a nuance when you have to think about BMNR is what is the differentiating factor? What is the moat of this business? How should anybody determine to choose this company versus any other company that does the same thing? And I think Tom Lee is a legitimate reason there. Now, what am I doing with BMNR? I actually bought more. I have covered calls for BMNR at $75 for October the 3rd. I think those are going to get blown out of the water, quite frankly. I had covered calls for 60 that I'm going to be giving up some shares of BMNR and locking in that profit from 40 to 60. And granted, I held that profit for like a month. So it was a 50% profit in a month, which is very, very good. I'm very happy with that. Like I mentioned in my previous video, I don't know if this is going to be a trade for me or a long-term hold. I have long calls on BMNR to offset my covered calls. So I said to myself, well, if I end up losing the shares and this thing does a massive parabolic move upwards, I still want to capitalize on that move upwards. So I have long calls for November. I also have long calls for January of 2026. And I also yesterday bought some spreads on BMNR following in the footsteps of Chris Patel because he entered this in a big way through spreads. Unlike Chris, however, I wanted to capture more upside. So I did $70 and $100 spreads. Basically, that means that for January of 2027, I am selling $100 calls and I am buying $70 calls. And my max profit is what is in between the $30. If BMNR hits $100, I make 30 of those. And why would I do that as opposed to just buying calls? Well, by essentially limiting my upside by selling calls at 100, I can essentially do it cheaper because I get paid to sell those calls and I pay to buy the $70 calls, which is much cheaper for me to do. So I have the spreads. I have just naked long calls that I bought for November and for January. I have BMNR shares that are not going to get taken away, basically in a different portfolio that I'm not wheeling on. And I also have cash secured puts on BMNR at $50, which it's basically right now very much in the green. The only negative is obviously the covered calls at $60 that are going to get taken away. We'll see. Those are for September 26th, but I think that BMNR is going to blow through $60. If they don't, then I'm going to keep those shares, of course, and I'm going to keep writing on those because that's in the wheeling portfolio. That's my position. I think that BMNR has a really good shot to go higher because this entire move upwards that it's done has been when Ethereum has been totally flat. Ethereum hasn't moved, but BMNR has moved quite a bit. And of course, a lot of that is as a result of this demand that we're seeing in BMNR. A lot of people on retail are talking about it. But when you see stocks moving violently like this, and when the underlying Ethereum is static, and being able to accumulate more Ethereum. And as you know, BMNR's entire mission is to have 5% of that total supply of Ethereum. And they're not even 50% of the way there. They're about 35% of the way there. So they're aggressively accumulating more and more Ethereum. And if Ethereum stays flat, then obviously it gives them more a chance to buy it at a discount. Because one thing you're going to see with BMNR is if Ethereum goes from 5,000 to 10,000, this thing is going to go blowing past $100 a share. Could that happen? I mean, Tom Lee thinks it could happen by the end of the year, but at the same time, they're accumulating really heavily to get to that 5% as quickly as possible. With regards to that accumulation, that 5%, there was something interesting here. So Chris posted the growth projection as a linear regression trend, saying that BMNR could reach 5% target by January 1st if they keep accumulating at this rate. And this user said they'll hit it by January if they keep the pace from launch. But if they keep with last month's pace, it won't be until March. And that's where I discovered this really cool site, which is BMNR Rocks, where I can see the price per share versus the Ethereum price. I can see the NAV per share and the MNAV as well. And the MNAV is, of course, the market to NAV calculation. You can see the Ethereum holdings versus the stock price here, and you can see the accumulation versus the accumulation goal. So 6 million Ethereum is their goal. They're at about 2 million right now. You can see the average price that they bought Ethereum at is $4,000, and the unrealized profit they're sitting on is $1.1 billion. They have $569 million cash on hand, presumably continuing to buy Ethereum as fast as they possibly can to reach that 5%. And so now I think a big part of this equation comes down to how fast can they accumulate. And of course, as the market cap keeps going up while Ethereum keeps staying stable, they can accumulate much, much more because the company is valued at a higher level when the underlying asset they're buying hasn't moved by that much. But when the underlying asset moves much more, the company is going to be worth much more. So presumably, these should move in lockstep with one another. And this is one of the big reasons why I'm so bullish on BMNR through the end of the year, is because they're going to continue to accumulate so heavily. And that's going to obviously reflect in their valuation and what the market is giving them as a multiple. So this is really the entire story of how fast can they accumulate Ethereum as a first layer, and then as a second layer, what can Ethereum do in that time? Is it going to stay stable, or is it going to move up in a violent way? I am very bullish. I mean, I even bought BMNR shares today in the $60 range. So, I mean, I'm not really shying away from $60. Of course, my price average is about $45. I've been buying as low as $40 last month. And this is, again, possibly a trade for me. I'm already capturing some profits here as a result of the covered calls, if they do, in fact, get called away on September 26th. But at the same time, I just put on a spreads position yesterday. I have long calls on BMNR. I have cash secured puts on BMNR, and I'm perfectly happy to take ownership of more shares. So I'm very, very bullish on the momentum behind this one. And again, coming back to the beginning of this video, Tom Lee is a big reason for that. So I think people should really do their homework when they're looking at a play like this, because at least from my portfolio, I think there's a lot of opportunity in this for me. But as always, please do your own homework. This is not financial advice. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every comment. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.